Blue sky thinking. That's the idea behind Speaker's Corner at the Responsible Investor Digital Festival Summer 2020. We asked the readers of Responsible Investor for their best and most innovative ideas, and here are some of the best. Dima Rifai is the founder of Creating Future Us. Her pitch is Governance Rebooted. Very interested to hear your pitch, Dima.
So thank you, Daniel, and really great to be with you today. Delighted to be contributing to this dialogue about future-fitting corporate governance, which I think is critical, especially at this moment in time. So Creating Future Us, as a background, is a not-for-profit I established almost 2 years ago to tackle the fast-changing digital age landscape and corporate responsibility within it. We look at a disruptive age through the lens of what we call digital age ESG. And we ask how this disruptive age is impacting organizations' decision-making processes or governance, and how that then affects, consequently, their impact on society. So last year, we established a white paper titled How Leaders Are Reshaping Society in a Digital Age New Order. And in it, we explore 11 areas, we call them pillars, that impacted businesses in this new digital age. We had no idea, of course, at the time that COVID-19 would accelerate so many of the trends we identified then. In February this year, we published Governance Rebooted, focusing specifically on the governance pillar. And in it, we explore how current governance practices, which flourished largely in the 1960s, were a construct of the industrial age, really. 60 years later, we found ourselves with a system that's fraying at the edges. It's been band-aided during the past 6 decades to adjust for various scandals and developments. But the digital age and this decade are going to put an immense strain on it. Investors have done a particularly good job of trying to address this through ESG principles, but that assumes that environmental and social principles are on par with governance. Yet we argue that governance drives an organization's environmental and societal actions, so we're emphasizing governance as being at the root of the other two. If we can get the right governance practices in places, then value accretive environmental and social actions would be at the heart of board decisions and actions. In Governance Rebooted, we identify 6 megatrends that are fraying the fabric of this current industrial age governance. The first one is real-time responsiveness. So in a time, as we were saying earlier, when things move, critical events can occur in minutes and go viral. The current preset board meeting structure and agendas leave boards continually struggling to catch up almost. The second one is intangibles. In a digital age where intangibles increasingly dominate balance sheets, company balance sheets, their offensive and defensive strategies have to reflect this heightened sensitivity to a ephemeral and volatile valuation, in effect. The third one is radical transparencies. So businesses are less able to shield their activities, development, communications from unwanted scrutiny in an age of disclosures, whistleblowers, leaks, hacks. So boards have to take a really nuanced and pragmatic approach to what sits behind this confidentiality wall. Otherwise, businesses become unwieldy and too structured and rigid. The fourth is multi-stakeholders. Obviously, especially now with what's going on, you see that there's an accountability to an increasing number of influential parties, some of which can have disproportionately outsized effects on companies' operations and valuations under given scenarios. And there are trade-offs to be done there. Exceptional complexity and uncertainty is also an outcome, because in the digital age, not only do you have increasingly influential complex algorithms that boards have to get their heads around, but layered on top of that are these multivectoral tipping points like climate change, the space race, and others that ratchet up complexity exponentially. So basically, you have a lack of visibility on trajectory and the speed of change that's generating enormous uncertainty for boards. And the last is value chain concentration. So you're getting this digital age rise of winner takes all business models that creates a host of challenges for the governance of both the dominant firms that are at the top of the pile, but all of those that are in their ecosystem, and, boards having to make a decision where they want to be in that concentrated value chain. So in the paper, we outline 5 areas that we recommend investors start to develop focus on and probe for and use judgment with until we can develop more standardized tools and toolkits, because we're really at the beginning of this movement. The first is compositions, and composition of boards that not only considers the functional diversity and the cognitive diversity, but also the psychological diversity. In a time when you have a lot of transition, you've got to think about, do I have risk takers or risk averse people on the board? And where's the balance between those two? Because you have to have the right balance on the board to come out at the right, outcomes. Structure, developing more agile governance structures and practices like we talked about earlier in the real-time example. Priority, agendas focusing less on repetitive, compliance-driven, business as usual items. Compliance has to be indeed taken into account, but let that not drive the agenda entirely. Greater symbiosis. How do you establish these rapid response feedback loops with stakeholders? And last but not least, education, because you have to continually educate to have informed, relevant input from your board members. So how do you keep them on top of all this stuff constantly, or cycle through enough that you get the right inputs constantly? So we're in the process of building this digital age governance toolkit, which we're very excited about. It's going to be a toolbox that comprises of governance practices that companies of various sizes, geographies, industries, listed or private, are using for positive, effective future fit their governance. We want to make this transition as frictionless for investors and their boards as possible, and we invite anyone interested in attending this session to reach out to connect to us on building this toolkit so we continue to create a rich one. And I'll hand it back to you.
So Dee, are you talking about a regulatory response or something more profound? What is it you envisage?
So I think it's a time for radical, not incremental change. I think we've done the incremental thing for the last 60 years. And frankly, we're at a point where enough band-aids have been applied. And I think this kind of also goes above regulation to self-governance, where I think a lot of this is happening now. It's happening in the self-governance space more than it is at the regulatory space, in the soft governance, you can call it, which is where ESG really sits, right? Some countries are more advanced than others, but largely you see that regulation is still catching up. So to give you some examples of some radical stuff that's happening, you have people like Salesforce and DVK, a company based in Hong Kong, putting AI out on their boards, right? To give them insights into the decision-making, the biases, the patterns that are emerging in their board conversations and board decisions, which I think is a very interesting development. Facebook, when, faced by all the hostile reactions, are now instigating an ostensibly independent oversight board for content moderation, because content moderation is so critical to their business. So fundamentally, we're looking at new structures, new compositions, new practices that allow boards to be agile, responsive, and most importantly, to add value to their organizations as this transition comes through.
What's the price? What's the cost of inaction? If we don't get this right, what are the ramifications?
Well, I mean, God knows COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter give you a perfect example of how quickly these things can come to boil and become so critical, and how not being right on that front foot puts you on such a back foot that you're kind of catching up and you're a follower rather than a leader. And so, if you haven't done the planning in advance, you haven't done scenario analysis and dynamic scenario analysis, then you really will be left behind, and you will at best look like a follower, at worst maybe fall afoul of these things. So I think the cost of inaction is huge. If businesses want to survive and thrive, they're going to need to bring in digital age ESG. There's no two ways about it.
Dima, thanks for this. Really interesting.
It's a pleasure. Anytime.